Europe, the year 1347. A ship drifts into the harbour. Its crew is covered in strange black swellings. Within days, the city is dying. Priests refuse to bury the dead, families abandon their own, and fear spreads faster than the plague itself. This was the Black Death, the deadliest pandemic in human history. Nearly half of Europe would be wiped out. And yet, some survived. But how? With no medicine, no knowledge of bacteria, no vaccines. Why did some people live while others perished? That's what we're uncovering today. And if you love discovering the hidden truths of the Middle Ages, make sure you subscribe so you won't miss the stories history never told you. And one more thing, as you're listening, tell me in the comments, would you have survived the Black Death? I'll be reading your answers. Now let's step back into the plague years. The 14th century was a place of both faith and filth. Cities bustled with merchants and craftsmen, but also with animals, waste and disease. Streets doubled as open sewers. Rats scurried through marketplaces and fleas fed on both man and beast. Most homes were dark, cramped, and poorly ventilated. Personal hygiene was rare. Bathing was sometimes feared as dangerous to health. In such conditions, the plague found the perfect breeding ground. But survival was possible, and those who lived through it did so in ways that seem both familiar and alien to us today. At first, fear spread faster than the disease itself. People whispered of a curse, of poisoned wells, of strangers bringing death into their towns. Others claimed it was a punishment from God, the consequence of humanity's sins. Physicians, what few there were, offered little help. They consulted the stars, bled their patients, or prescribed potions made from crushed gems, snake flesh, or powdered toads. It was medicine rooted more in superstition than in science. And yet, despite their limited understanding, some patterns began to emerge. Families noticed that those who stayed inside, avoiding contact, often lived longer. Some cities, like Milan, took drastic action, sealing entire households inside their homes, whether alive or dead. Brutal, yes, but effective. Others, like Venice and Ragusa, pioneered quarantine, forcing ships and travellers to remain isolated for weeks before entering the city. This practice, born of desperation, became one of the first real weapons against the spread of disease. But isolation was only one part of the story. Across Europe, ordinary people turned to remedies rooted in folk belief. They burned herbs to cleanse the air, carried small bags of lavender or rosemary pressed to their noses, and stuffed their clothes with fragrant spices. They believed that bad air, miasma, carried the plague, and that strong scents could ward it off. Some of these practices were useless. Others, like burning juniper or carrying wormwood, may have had mild insect-repelling effects, accidentally protecting people from flea bites. Others wore charms or amulets inscribed with prayers, convinced that divine words could shield them. In some towns, processions filled the streets, with crowds chanting hymns and begging for mercy. The Flagellants, a radical religious group, marched barefoot through villages, whipping themselves until their backs bled, hoping that their suffering would appease God's wrath. Ironically, these gatherings often spread the plague further, but those who isolated in monasteries or retreated into remote religious houses sometimes escaped the worst of it. Still, not everyone relied on faith alone. Some people fled. Wealthy nobles abandoned their estates and retreated to the countryside. Merchants closed their shops and vanished into the hills. Even peasants, when they could, left their villages behind in search of safety in the wilderness. The great Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who witnessed the plague in Florence, described how friends abandoned friends, parents left their children, and lovers deserted one another. Fear dissolved even the closest bonds. For those who could flee to remote areas, survival was more likely. Geography mattered. Those living in isolated valleys, high mountain villages, or distant rural settlements often escaped infection entirely. They lived apart from the crowded, rat-infested cities, and their natural isolation became their salvation. But chance also played a role. Not everyone who encountered the plague died. Some individuals possessed natural immunity, though they did not know it. Others were simply spared by fate, surviving when everyone around them perished. In the chaos of the Black Death, survival could be as arbitrary as a roll of the dice. Imagine, for a moment, the sights and sounds of a medieval town struck by the plague. Church bells toll endlessly for the dead. Carts piled with bodies rumble down narrow streets. The cries of mourners mix with the silence of abandoned homes. Priests walk from house to house, administering last rites until they too collapse. In such a world, to survive meant not only avoiding infection, but enduring the psychological weight of despair. And yet, human resilience endured. People clung to rituals, to prayer, to the faint hope that tomorrow might be better. Communities experimented with new rules, quarantines, restrictions on gatherings, even early forms of public health orders. These measures, though crude, planted the seeds for the future. The Black Death changed Europe forever. Entire villages vanished, but survivors inherited abandoned lands. Labour became scarce, giving peasants new bargaining power against their lords. Old feudal systems weakened. Medicine, shaken by its failure, began to evolve, slowly turning away from superstition and toward observation. In this sense, the survivors of the plague were not just lucky, they became the foundation for a new world. So, how did medieval people survive the Black Death without medicine? Through isolation, desperate remedies, faith, flight, geography, and sometimes sheer chance. They survived by instinct, by ritual, and by resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. The Black Death reminds us that survival is not always about knowledge or technology. Sometimes it is about endurance. It is about facing the unthinkable and refusing to surrender hope. And so, from the ashes of the plague, Europe was reborn. Which of these survival methods surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of the medieval world.